So guys, welcome back to the channel, and on today's video I have a special one for you. Well, it's special in the way that so many people have asked for this video that I think that automatically makes it special. And in reality, I think maybe 6 or 7 people have asked for this video. But if 6 or 7 people have asked for it, I'm sure there is at least another 6 or 7 people that would like to see it. So with that clumsy explanation of why I am filming this video is a shootout between the New Balance Rebel V4 versus the Adidas EVO SL. Let's get into it. Before we get started, I do just want to say that this video is in partnership with my friends over at Roadrunner Sports. Now, both the New Balance Rebel V4 and the Adidas EVO SL were sent to me for the purpose of review. However, no one at Roadrunner Sports has told me what to say. They don't have any editorial privileges, and all the thoughts and opinions are my own. With that said, you are going to be able to pick up a pair of the New Balance Rebel V4 for $140, or maybe, and you'll be able to pick up a pair of the Adidas EVO SL for $150. So right off the bat, like before we even got started, the New Balance Rebel V4 is $10 less than the Adidas EVO SL. I mean, that's not nothing. So early on, the Rebel V4 has taken a lead, but will it stay the best option? Well, you're gonna have to watch the rest of the video to find out. Okay, why don't we get started with some specs, because everybody loves specs, or at least I do. I really like specs of a shoe. And we'll get started with the Adidas EVO SL. Now, the Adidas EVO SL has 38.5 in the heel, 32 in the forefoot for a 6.5mm drop. The New Balance Rebel V4 has 34 in the heel, 28 in the forefoot for a 6mm drop. So 6mm drop, 6.5mm drop. Look, if I'm totally honest, I can't tell a difference between these two. I mean, that's probably obvious to a lot of you, because unless there are like several millimeter difference, I won't be able to tell a difference. Now, in a US men's size 9, Adidas claims that the EVO SL will tip the scale at 7.9 ounces or 224 grams. And in my size, a US men's size 13, the EVO SL tips the scale at 10 ounces even or 283 grams. The New Balance Rebel V4, according to New Balance, in the US men's size 9, will tip the scale at 7.5 ounces or 212 grams. So the Rebel V4 is 12 grams less in the sample size than the EVO SL. And when we jump up to a US men's size 13, which is my size, the difference is even bigger. The New Balance Rebel V4 is 26 grams lighter than the EVO SL. So look, I see what you see. The New Balance Rebel V4 is $10 less, and it's lighter than the Adidas EVO SL. Now, the story doesn't end there, but I should talk about sizing, because although I am wearing both a US men's size 13 in the Rebel V4 and the EVO SL, I probably should have gone down half a size in the Rebel V4. Because generally speaking, New Balance is quite a voluminous shoe, so there is a lot of volume in the upper of New Balance, and I find that I have to drop to a 12.5 in order to make everything fit just how it should ideally. Now, in the US men's size 13, I can't say I ran into any issues with running. It's just I do have to tighten it, I think, a little more than I like. And in fact, in this footage, you can see that there is just a little bit of bunching at the front of my Rebel V4s, just where I'm cinching that upper together. And look, that didn't affect performance. It's actually only when I'm looking at it that I can see the difference. But even though it didn't affect performance, what I can say I noticed is in the forefoot and toe box of both of these shoes. Now, if you have a wider foot, I think your mind has been made up, and you will be going with the New Balance Rebel V4, because it is quite a bit wider in the forefoot than the EVO SL. Now, the EVO SL, on the other hand, although it is narrower than the Rebel V4, I didn't find it to be too narrow for me. In fact, I thought it fit beautifully, and my feet still had room to move around, or at least it felt that way. Now, of course, my feet did feel like they had plenty of room to move around in the Rebel V4, but it felt more like my feet could do like a complete 180 inside the shoe. I mean, not really, but compared with the EVO SL, that's kind of what it felt like. Okay, ignore everything I just said. The Rebel V4 is just simply wider in the forefoot than the EVO SL. I think that's enough. Now, of course, both of these shoes are made to do the same thing. They are kind of like daily trainers, but up-tempo daily trainers. Moreover, they are both non-plated up-tempo daily trainers. And what makes a shoe like an up-tempo, non-plated daily trainer? I'd say the up-tempo part comes with weight. These are definitely lighter than your typical daily trainer. And because they're lighter, they're easier to turn over, and you just end up running a little faster in them. So why don't we start at the top, and we'll work our way down like we always do. And I'm going to hold up the Rebel V4. You can see that heel collar. Now, I know I called it a daily trainer, and you could certainly use this as a daily trainer, but the padding around the heel collar is not like super plush. It's not overdone. In fact, I wish more shoes would just adopt this level of cushioning, because it's quite ideal. You get all the cushioning you need without the extra plushness that you really don't need. It works. So even though the cushioning around the heel collar is quite thin, I found it to be more than enough. The heel counter on the Rebel V4 is semi-rigid, and by semi-rigid, I mean it's really quite rigid, but I am able to like manipulate it just a little bit. I can push down, so it's not the most rigid. With that said, I didn't experience any heel slip in the Rebel V4. Now, of course, if you did find it to be a little loose, we do have the extra eyelet hole, just so so you can do the lace lock method. We actually have that on the EVO SL too, so don't worry too much about that. Let's just quickly switch over to the EVO SL for the same thing, and I'm gonna hold this up. In fact, let me hold up both. I don't know how well you can see that. I might have to overlay something, but the EVO SL is much like the Rebel V4 in that there isn't a daily trainer amount of padding around this heel collar. However, there is a little more padding around the heel collar than the Rebel V4, but still, it isn't over the top, and it's a very comfortable step-in feel and, you know, like cushioning around your ankle. I mean, it's good enough. It doesn't need all that extra padding. Now, the heel counter on the EVO SL is like, it's super rigid. So if heel slip was an issue, maybe this is something you're going to be looking for, but honestly, I didn't notice too much of a difference between the EVO SL and the Rebel V4. In fact, when I was running in both shoes at the same time, so one on each foot, I actually thought my heel was a little looser in the EVO SL than it was in the Rebel V4. So take that for what it's worth. It definitely wasn't a scientific experiment. I don't know if I tied my shoes at exactly the same tightness, but it was just something that I noticed when I had one shoe on each foot. I should say that I never noticed any heel looseness in the EVO SL when I was running in them solo. Let's move on to the upper. Adidas is using a synthetic and textile upper. It's an engineered mesh. It's really lovely and thin. It's super breathable. Got an underlay coming around the toe box just to give that a little structure. We have the obvious overlays of the 3 stripes on both the lateral and the medial side, and then we do have a little reinforcement coming along the eyelet chain, which we're going to see in all shoes. The tongue on the EVO SL is almost like a race day tongue. It is super thin. Now, it's not gusseted, so perhaps you might have to take a little bit of care to get your foot seated, but once your foot is actually seated inside the shoe, the tongue didn't move around. We do have a big lace loop here in the front, and even though this tongue is very thin, there is a little bit of padding right here on the top, and I didn't experience any issues with the laces biting into the top of my foot. The laces stayed tied, which really we don't want them to do any more than that, and there was a good midfoot lockdown, okay? No issues whatsoever. Now, the Rebel V4 is using New Balance's super breathable Phantom Fit upper, and it is lovely and light. Now, if I look at both shoes at the same time, I'm not sure if it's the color, which is leading me to believe that the Phantom Fit upper is maybe a little thinner than the mesh on the EVO SL, but if it is a little thinner, it's really not by much. I would say the EVO SL and the Rebel V4 are about equal when it comes to breathability. Just like the EVO SL, the Rebel V4 has an underlay coming around the toe box to keep that upper off your foot. We have the big N on the lateral side, a smaller N on the medial side, reinforcement along the eyelet chain. Now, the tongue on the Rebel V4, it's almost like a piece of sponge that's been roughly cut out. Like when I look at the top of the tongue, it just doesn't seem perfectly smooth. Or maybe it does look perfectly smooth, but because it's a piece of sponge, I think it just looks like it's been rough cut. But that really doesn't do anything. That sponge-ish tongue has holes drilled into it, so it's going to make it super breathable. The tongue on the Rebel V4 is gusseted on both sides, and there is a lace loop right here on the front. So again, no issues with the tongue sliding around when I'm running in it. It was overall a very good lockdown. Now remember, I could have gone down half a size in the Rebel V4, but even so, I still had a good lockdown. So let's move on down to the midsole. And this, I think, is a pretty big point of comparison between both shoes, because New Balance is using their FuelCell, and it's their PIBA EVA blender FuelCell. So it's going to be light, it's going to be responsive, and it's going to be fairly soft. Now, the Adidas EVO SL, on the other hand, is using a full slab of Lightstrike Pro. Now, it is the same formulation of Lightstrike Pro that is found in the Adios Pro 3. So it's the same foam found in their top-of-the-line race day shoe for the last couple years, until the Adios Pro 4 came out. So because of that, you know that the EVO SL has a top-of-the-line foam. It's very light, it's very responsive, it feels good underfoot, and it feels fast. Of course, the experience of running in the EVO SL is not going to be the same as the Adios Pro 3, because we do have those carbon rods in the Adios Pro 3, which is going to give a lot more responsiveness to it. But still, plain Lightstrike Pro is pretty responsive. In fact, I would say that both of these shoes actually feel very similar underfoot. Like the ride, when you just immediately start running, they do feel fairly similar. I think the Rebel V4 is just slightly softer, but it really took running with a shoe on each foot for me to notice the difference. If I was to run in one and then the other, I don't think I'd notice a difference in how soft they were. Now, if I had to choose a winner on which shoe was more responsive, I am going to go with the EVO SL. And that could be because the foam just doesn't feel as soft underfoot. So when foams are a little firmer, sometimes they can give that feeling of responsiveness or ground feel a little more. I'm not sure what it is, but it did feel just slightly more responsive than the Rebel V4. Now, another thing I noticed, now there is more stack height in the EVO SL, so that's just to preface what I'm about to say. Now, I did notice that when I was running longer runs in the Rebel V4, I did have a feeling that it wasn't protective enough to go for really long runs. And by really long runs, I'm talking about like maybe anything over 10 miles. I never ran into that issue shoe with the EVO SL. So perhaps you're someone that wants a non-plated kind of up-tempo shoe to use for a lot of your runs, including races. And if you're racing something like a half marathon up to a marathon, and you're going to be choosing one of these, for me personally, I would go with the Adidas EVO SL just because it remained feeling protective even when I was running really long. And let's just say I didn't have a race day shoe to run with on race day, I would definitely reach for the EVO SL rather than the Rebel V4. Now, of course, I have done full slew of testing in both of these shoes. I have run long runs, I've run a lot of easy runs, I've done workouts, intervals, tempos, of course strides at the end of easy runs. And I would say that at a tempo pace, I think these are both evenly paired. I mean, I think they're tied. I really couldn't choose one over the other. But for shorter intervals and strides, so with strides, we're talking like running for 30 seconds, like a 5K pace. So quite quick. And for intervals, I'm talking 400s, 800s, mile repeats. For those longer intervals, I'd probably go with the EVO SL as well. But remember, that's just my preference. If you have a wider foot, or you like a slightly softer ride, maybe the Rebel V4 is going to be the right choice for you. Now, saying that, I think generally speaking, I do prefer a softer ride. So it's funny to me that I didn't actually prefer the Rebel V4. But again, I think it's because the EVO SL just feels a little more protective on my feet. Now, if we come down to the outsole, we'll just take a quick comparison here. You can see we've got a good amount of outsole rubber on both of these shoes. Really, no issues on each. I don't remember having any issues with slip on the Rebel V4, but occasionally I do remember feeling a little slick-footed feeling with the EVO SL, but I think that was more the surface I was running on. I think I was running on a very smooth and wet surface at the time. So again, not a scientific comparison between the grip of both, but even just looking at the outsole of the Rebel V4, you can see there are just a lot more indents and it just looks a little grippier than the super smooth, slick outsole rubber on the EVO SL. If you have run in either the Rebel V4 or the EVO SL, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the grip. So, which one is it going to be? We have the Rebel V4. Look, I'm going to bring up the price again because I think price is important to a lot of people. I mean, obviously it's important to a lot of people, but $140, $150. I think that they are only $10 apart doesn't really make up your mind, because if you do have a wide foot, I think the Rebel V4 is going to be the better choice for you, if I'm quite honest. If you have narrow feet, I think the EVO SL is going to be your better choice. Now, I hope I'm not making this decision because I have narrow feet, but my preference is the EVO SL. I've really enjoyed running in this shoe. I mean, that's not really fair because I have really enjoyed running in the Rebel V4. But as a whole package, I think for that $10 premium over the Rebel V4, I think the EVO SL may just offer a little bit more. But again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Guys, it isn't easy. Remember, in my size, 26 grams heavier than the Rebel V4. In fact, as I'm holding them here, I can feel the difference in weight, but weight isn't everything. All right, guys, that's it for now. It's Matt B. This has been a shootout between the New Balance Rebel V4 and the Adidas EVO SL. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.